software platform that gets installed inside the existing data system. So supervisory control and data acquisition. So think of it like your operating system for your multi-billion-dollar asset that is moving energy around the world, right? We install into that control system and we enable the autonomous operation of that. But we think of it like a co-pilot for control room operators, right? Or an autopilot system.
Welcome to Business Ninjas, brought to you by WriteForMe, where you'll hear from business leaders who are out there growing their business and slaying it every day. Learn from the masters. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Business Ninjas. I'm here today with Vicki Knott. She's the CEO and co-founder at CruxOCM. Vicki, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, excited to have you. So Vicki, why don't you start and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So a little bit about myself. So I am the CEO and co-founder of a company called CruxOCM. So I'm originally from Newfoundland, Canada, so absolute middle of nowhere. But if folks come from away, then they'll know where I'm from. the Broadway musical. Started this company a while ago, and excited to tell you folks more about it.
That's awesome. So why don't we dive right in? Tell me a little bit about CruxOCM.
Sure. Yeah. So I think that we'll add on to my background, and that's how it'll fold into that story. I'm a chemical engineer. I worked in pulp and paper. Labor first, and then into chemical engineering and process control stuff. That mentality I took into when I went into oil and gas, so our lovely energy sector. And I took that mentality in. And so I actually trained as a control room operator for the notorious Keystone Pipeline, and then worked as an engineer there for quite some time. So from that experience, came to understand exactly how control room operators operate the critical infrastructure that powers our entire economy, and challenges that they have being successful with it. So I love to use the analogy, pilots in planes have autopilot software. We're not going to get in a plane to fly from, New York to LA or Calgary to Houston without autopilot software, but we're also not going to do it without a pilot. So our critical infrastructure that powers our entire economy really needs these capabilities, and that's the mission that we are on.
That's really interesting. So tell me more about, what CruxOCM offers.
Yeah, so we offer a software platform that gets installed inside the existing SCADA system, so supervisory control and data acquisition. So think of it like your operating system for your multi-billion-dollar asset that is moving energy around the world, right? So we install into that control system, and we enable the autonomous operation of that. But we think of it like a co-pilot for the control room operators, right, or an autopilot system. So it simplifies how they work. So instead of them pushing, they're going to start up a pipeline and they've got to, open their valves remotely. So they click a button and it opens on their operating system. So instead of them clicking the button, open the valve and pump and change the set points to increase the pressures, to increase the flow, they're able to set a target flow rate, and our software will execute all of the intermediary steps on their behalf to get them to that target in the most efficient way possible. So that's anything you need to dig in on there for those who are not familiar with control rooms, control systems, and how our critical infrastructure is operated. Is there anything I could share more for the audience?
Yeah, I was going to say, let's get down into it. For our listeners who may not, necessarily understand the intricacies of a control room, what do you mean when you say that?
Yes. So think NASA control room, right? That's probably the easiest way to think of it. So if you think NASA control room, you've got all these screens in front of you and you're operating a giant thing. So when it comes to, a pipeline system, you're sitting in a control room with all of these screens and you're operating remotely, a pipeline system that might go from northern Canada all the way to Texas. And you're able to do that by pushing buttons. And, the same as what you do when you're on your phone and you get off a plane and you want to make sure your Nest is on so that your house is warm enough, right? So same concept. We just are using that to operate the world's critical infrastructure. Also, another one that's maybe easier for people to grasp is grid control, right? So if you think of the electrical grid, like sure, you can just plug in at any time. However, there's someone behind the scenes that's, when the wind stops blowing, they're making sure that natural gas-fired power plant comes on to ensure that the base load is there so that people can plug things in. So is that help with the magnitude?
Yeah, absolutely. And, talking about having like the benefits of having an automated control room, walk me through why that's so important and so efficient for companies.
Yeah, and the fun part too about that is there's a general misconception that these control rooms are fully automated and they're not. So that's a fun one, and that's a fun sales challenge as well. But
Talk to me about that.
okay, let's go into that one. Yeah, so there seems to be an assumption that at the executive level in these companies, and then general public opinion that these things are fully automated, right? Like that the software exists, the operating system exists. And I think the analogy is like, just because you have Microsoft Windows doesn't mean that if you're going to go, pay a bill, it doesn't mean that that bill is going to be automatically paid on time every month and that workflow is already set up. That's probably the easiest analogy to think about it. So that's the gap in the industry that is not common knowledge that needs to be filled.
Interesting. Why do you think that is?
I think it's I think so I'd actually think that because so if you think of these assets and you think of the critical infrastructure nature of them, they're very, very important to the country, to the globe, right? And so because of that, certain safety measures and security measures are required. And every positive has a negative, right? And so because of that, it ends up that the security around these types of facilities is so high that they become quite isolated. And I think what that's created over time is a bit of a disconnect between what's actually happening inside of control rooms and how people are working versus the common thought process or the common knowledge of what actually happens. There's been a disconnect.
Interesting. And I think that another common misconception, you and I have had a little bit of a conversation offline talking about, there being a disconnect between that buzzword of being data driven.
Yeah.
But, your industry has been data driven and is actually past that, correct?
Yeah. And so that was a really, really fun one too that I found super interesting. So we have this one misconception on one side that's like not really serving the industry, but then there's this misconception on the other side. So like, because I'm obviously spending time now, we're a venture capital backed company and I'm spending quite a bit of time in San Francisco and in Silicon Valley. And there's this misconception that the energy industry is so old and so outdated and it needs to update. It needs IIoT and it needs data observability. And I'm like, and it needs big data analytics. And I laugh because I'm like, okay, I was a 19-year-old like engineer and I was pulling millions and millions of data points and developing algorithms and I was pulling those data points from remote devices in real time. And so I'm like, it's really interesting because there's, parts of the industry are very technologically advanced compared to, what we can now relate to, which is telling Amazon to turn off the lights. That stuff existed 10, 15 years ago, maybe not telling them, but being able to do this stuff remotely has existed years and years ago in this industry to be able to, provide energy security for the globe, right? Like there was a big need to make those advancements quite quickly. So that misconception I find quite fun as well, because it's like, wait a minute, that stuff already exists. And we just use different words.
Interesting. And, I'm curious, what would you say the biggest challenge that your customers have before they start working with CruxOCM? Is it that they're potentially working on another platform that isn't working as, seamlessly as CruxOCM? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so anecdotally, one of our very, very early customers, the early adopter on that lovely crossing the chasm curve, when we started telling them what we were up to and, they trusted us because of mine and my co-founder's background and expertise in the industry, their feedback was, we didn't even know what you do was possible. Right. So that was really interesting. So in terms of how, as a business, I guess what our internal competitors are when we're selling, it's the knowledge gap of, is this possible? Does it already exist? We're not exactly competing with, I guess, another platform, because the platform that's in there, like supervisory control and data acquisition, is a fantastic platform that does exactly what it's supposed to do, right? It creates a central location where these multi-billion-dollar, assets that span across countries and continents can be actually operated, right? So we're not competing with that. That is absolutely necessary, needs to be there, and is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. We layer on top.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you kind of clearing that up. Vicki, I think that, this has been, a super interesting conversation. If people wanted to go to learn more about CruxOCM, where would they go to learn more?
Ooh, our website, www.cruxocm.com. We also have a YouTube channel where I just talk about all things industry, and I probably go real deep. But if folks are interested, that's on YouTube for CruxOCM. And we also are quite active on LinkedIn, I myself, as well as the company. And we love to share as much information as we can about this industry. And and I like to throw this one into, like, some people are like, oh, well, you're working in oil and gas. Oil and gas is, it's still 83% of our energy mix globally, which makes it a very important player. Plus, oil and gas companies are the ones investing the most in alternative energy sources. And they understand the energy mix globally. They understand the infrastructure required. And they're fantastic people to be able to further the energy transition. So I like to highlight that as well when it comes to what we do, and that we want to be empowering that stuff. So
that's fantastic. And that's a good little plug too. We covered kind of the surface level of what CruxOCM does, but if you really want to take that deeper dive, go visit your YouTube channel. Yeah. Take a peek at getting deep into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, the nitty gritty, and it's a fun, complex space.
Awesome. Well, Vicki, before we head out, is there anything that you want to leave our listeners with? I know you highlighted, talking about the gas and energy industry. Anything else that you want to leave our listeners with before we head out?
I don't think so. I think, just, take time and take effort to understand energy security, understand our energy mix, understand, that energy demand is increasing globally, and that, if we want to be able to afford to drive our cars, we need to do many things, not just one. There's no silver bullet. So that's probably what I like to leave people with.
Fantastic. Well, Vicki, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you talking about, CruxOCM, the platform, kind of, the importance of the industry in the global economy. I think this was a great conversation. I appreciate you being on Business Ninjas today.
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey.
Great to have you.